This lesson right here should be pretty quick compared to the first few lessons that we've done. This is just straight up algebra. So hopefully you remember this from last year when you had Algebra 1. And even before that, pre-algebra, even like 7th, 8th grade math taught you some of this stuff. Okay, you know that letters are used in algebra and they represent numbers. This thing right here, the algebraic expression, the expression is when you don't necessarily have an equal sign in here. So for instance, let's just do a problem and we'll just kind of explain it through the example. These problems will say evaluate, evaluate. So you just want to find, well, let me just write it down first before we talk about it. So this is just x minus 5 plus y. Now, if that's all I gave you right there, you wouldn't really be able to do anything with it. You can't really solve for x, you can't solve for y, because you don't know what it's equal to. You don't have two sides, a left side and a right side. There's really nothing you can do with this. Well, you say, well, I could probably subtract 5 from this and add whatever this number is, but the problem is we don't know what the numbers are. But that's what they're going to do in these problems. They're going to tell you what the numbers are. And this is how they do that. They just say, okay, evaluate this. This is your expression, your algebraic expression. It's algebraic because it has letters, variables, plus numbers, and it tells you to do some stuff. This tells you to subtract, this tells you to add. And so it says if x is equal to 15 and if y is equal to negative 7, I'll just write it like that. Now, is there anything magical about x being 15 and y being negative 7? No, not at all. That was just kind of like a random number that they picked to put in here, and we just have to find out what this thing right here is going to equal if x is 15, if y is equal to negative 7. Now, x could be a bunch of other numbers. Y could be a bunch of other numbers, but this author said, okay, let's make x 15, y negative 7. So what we're going to do is figure out what this is equal to. Now, here's an expression that I use, a verbal expression that I use. I say plug and chug. You'll hear that a lot from me. So I like to plug them in. What does that mean? We substitute. Okay, if you want to be real technical and math vocabulary wise, then we would say substitute, but I'm just going to say plug it in. So right here it says x minus 5, so you find out what x is. X is 15, so we put a 15 in for the x. So instead of x, remember a number stands for, or a letter, I'm sorry, represents a number, and in this case this x represents a 15. So I'm going to stick a 15 in here instead of an x, and I'm going to go minus 5, right, because I know what 5 is. And then it says add a y to it. So we're going to add whatever y is. What is y? Well, they said that y is negative 7, so I could put plus negative 7. Tell you what I'm going to do, though. Now, I will teach you some algebra skills, hopefully not from scratch, though, because you should have had, all last year, you should have done Algebra 1. So what I'm going to do, plus a negative, that's just a little bit too much. So what I'm going to do, if I have a positive and a negative next to each other, it's basically just the same as just saying minus 7. You could say plus negative 7. I'm just going to say minus 7. So let's go ahead and work this out. Now we're going to talk about order of operations, and in this case, really, you just work left to right. If you remember order of operations, let's see, I think there might be another lesson. Maybe not in here. Yeah, I don't think they do order of operations in here, but in this situation, let me do this. Do you remember this? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay, it's not really what it stands for, but it's an easy way for us to remember it. P is parentheses, E is exponents, M multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. This is the order that you do things algebraically. This is what you do first, then you go to this step, then to this one. But if you watch this, just do a little like that. Multiplication and division are kind of done at the same time. If you have multiplication and division, you work from left to right. All right, but you do multiplication and division before you do any addition or subtraction. So if there was things that were multiplied or divided, I would do that first before I would do any addition and subtraction. Now, there is no multiplication, there is no parentheses, there's no exponents. The only thing there is addition and subtraction. So when you have just addition or subtraction, you're just going to work from left to right. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to go 15 minus 5. Let's just do 2 at a time, all right? So 15 minus 5 is 10. And then you just write down whatever's next, minus 7, and then you go 10 minus 7, which is 3. Notice how I showed my steps. I wrote the problem out. I wrote the whole thing out. I even wrote the word evaluate. I wrote this little expression. I wrote what x and y are equal to. Then I showed that I plugged them in and I did my work. Okay, I showed it step by step and I got my answer and I circled it. This is exactly how you should do your homework. Okay, I don't want you just to say, oh, I could have just done that in my head. And some of you could have done that in your head. You could have just looked at this and say, oh, 15 minus 5 is 10, minus 7 is 3, boom, just write down 3. But I will not accept that in a homework. Right? I must see your steps. I must see how. Okay? I must see how you got to your answer. That's very, very, very important to me, and it's important almost every single math teacher that teaches this. So I want to see your steps on your homework problems, not just the answer. All right, I said I'd be a little quicker, and I'm talking a little too much. So let's go on to the next example. This is example 2. It's in the book. It's on page P10 if you want to follow along. Again, this says evaluate, and it even throws some other words. It even says evaluate the expression, but I'm just going to write the word evaluate. It says evaluate each expression. So there's actually 2 problems in this one example. Okay. And they tell you what the letters are right off the bat. So they say k is equal to -2. They tell you that n is equal to -4. And they also tell you that p is equal to 5. This time we have 3 variables. All right, let's do the first. Just put a, because this is the first part of the second example. Okay, or the first problem in the second example. Let's do this very quickly. If I get 2k plus n over p minus 3. Okay, this is what I want to evaluate. We're evaluating this if k is equal to -2, n's -4, and p is 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug and chug. We're going to put some stuff in here. Now, it's not just addition and subtraction that's going on this time. You have some multiplication. You got a big division sign right here. That fraction is a division sign. So this is what we're going to look at first. It's 2k. It means 2 times k. Now, in my class, I'm going to show multiplication for the most part. Probably 95% of the time, I'm going to show multiplication with parentheses. You can show multiplication in algebra by different methods, but I like the parentheses, so use my method. Plus n, so it's plus -4, but remember we just talked about this. Plus -4 is the same thing as -4. Now, if you prefer to put a plus -4, it's perfectly fine. I don't mind that at all. Over, this is divide, and then p minus 3. So p is 5 and then minus 3. Again, notice I wrote the problem out and I'm showing my steps. I'm showing that I plugged everything in. Let's keep going. 2 times -2. Oh, let's talk about this first. Order of operations. Remember, we do multiplication, division first before you do any addition and subtraction. Now, in this situation, this is a division problem. So when I have a big fraction like this, I always work the top and then work the bottom. It really doesn't matter which one you do first, but I work the top, then I work the bottom, and then I go ahead and I continue with my order of operations. So let's do the top. So if I just look at this thing that I've circled right here, this top, what do I do first? I do the 2 times -2. Why? Is it because it shows up first? No, it's because it's order of operations, which says you multiply before you add or subtract. So let's just do this in our head. 2 times -2 is -4. And now we're done with this, and then we can just put a -4 next to this. You could figure out what the answer to that is, but I'm going to do the bottom next. Okay, I always simplify the top, then I simplify the bottom. I could keep going on the top. It doesn't make any difference. Let's just do the bottom, though. 5 minus 3. 5 minus 3 is just easy. That's just plain old 2. There you go. Let's finish up and do the top. Again, let's figure out what the top is before we do any of that division stuff. -4 minus 4. Now, you might have learned this little trick. It's called add a sign, or add a line, change a sign. Okay, what I usually say is when you have a subtraction problem, it's just the same as an addition problem. It's kind of like what we started with right here. You could add a line, change a sign. So this is positive, we change that sign to a negative. Or I just say add the opposite. So it's -4 plus -4. You should be able to do that anyway. -4, and you should really be doing this without using a calculator, okay? Don't have your calculator out for this stuff, okay? You need to know how to do this without a calculator. If you really, really, really have to, I guess you can, but, you know, it's important that you get the right answer, but it's also important that you know how your steps for and know your rules for addition and subtraction. Okay, -4 plus -4 is -8. and the bottom's already simplified. Now we don't keep it like this, okay? Do not keep it like this. This reduces. It's 8 divided by 2. It's negative 8 divided by 2. So negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. That's your answer, and you just keep it just like that. All right, let's do another one. This, we're using the same k, n, and p, but it's a different problem. So this is what we're evaluating this time. K squared plus 2n. All right. All right, so we're just going to plug and chug again. Let's use a different color for this. Right here, not going to put anything in for negative 3, so you just keep it negative 3, put your parentheses, and this is k, and it's being squared. Look at what k is. K is negative 2. Now, if k was just a positive number, I wouldn't need another parentheses, but watch what I'm going to do. I think this is very important. I'm going to put a parentheses, especially if that's negative, because I'm squaring that whole thing. So I'm going to put negative 2 squared. See how the k is negative 2? Don't just put negative 2 squared, because that's going to give you a different answer. All right, you don't want to do that. If you have a negative and you're squaring it or you're multiplying it by something, put it in parentheses. It's super important that you do that. All right, let's keep going. There's your k squared plus 2n, or 2 times n. I don't care if n is negative or positive. If I'm showing that it's being multiplied, I put it in parentheses. We discussed that in the other problem. All right, so that parentheses around the negative 4. This is around the negative 2. I need to close that whole entire thing with this parentheses. See, this one goes with this one. All right, what do we do first? Remember the please, let's see, please excuse, right, my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses first, then exponents. So what we're talking about as far as parentheses, all the stuff in here, you got to figure out first before you multiply by that negative 3. Some of you know about distributive property. Don't distribute right now. Figure out what that number is inside that big old parentheses before you multiply it by negative 3. Now, what's in the parentheses? Well, we have an exponent, don't we? So I'll tell you what, let's just keep this outside. We'll mess with this later. Let's figure out what's in here. This is negative 2, and it's in parentheses. It's being squared. It's negative 2 is the thing that's being squared. So negative 2 times negative 2. When you square something, you multiply it by itself. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Okay, that's different if I would have just done this, and I didn't, let's say I didn't put the parentheses around it. This is different. This negative 2 squared, you're only squaring the 2, not the negative. This would have been negative 4. But on this one, you're squaring the negative, and you're squaring the 2. So negative times negative is positive. 2 times 2 is 4. Plus, now we figure out this thing right here. Now we can do our multiplication. We did our exponent, now we do our multiplication. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. I could put plus negative 8, but it's the same exact thing as just minus 8. Now what do? We don't do any multiplication. Don't do distributive property here. Now you could, it wouldn't be wrong, but it's more difficult to do it that way. So let's do what's in the parentheses, and then we'll multiply it. So I still keep the negative 3. Notice, I brought it all the way down. Haven't messed with it until the very, very end. 4 minus negative 8 is negative 4. Negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. You circle your answer, and then that's it. We have one more to do for this lesson. And it says to evaluate, this is the last one we're going to do. And here we go. Now this is just a straight bar up and down. This is not a parentheses. Kind of acts like a parentheses, but it does a little bit more than a parentheses. Hopefully you recognize that little bar straight up and down. That's absolute value. Absolute value means it's basically how far away a number is from 0. Or we just say whatever's in here, it's going to be positive. All right, it's not necessarily the opposite sign. Sometimes it is, but it's always positive. So we work what's inside the absolute value. If it came out negative, we turn it into a positive. If it comes out positive already, we just keep it positive. All right, we don't change it. And we can't evaluate this yet unless we know what A, B, and C are equal to. And they tell you. They say if, let's see, A is negative 2 and B is negative 4, and C is 3. All right, so now we're going to plug and chug. That's what I like to call it. So let's see what we're going to do first. Keep that 3 there, keep that absolute value there, and I'm just going to replace or substitute in these numbers for a and b. So a is -2. Put the minus sign right there. That's where that minus sign comes from. And then b. What's b? It's -4. You got two minus signs next to each other. That's important. Plus a 2, then another absolute value. It's c minus 5. C is just plain old 3, then minus 5. Now, the absolute value on that, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, absolute value is not really in there, but we kind of work absolute value like we work it if it was a parentheses. So what we're going to do is we are going to do this stuff and this stuff first before we multiply it by the 3, before we multiply this by the 2. So it kind of acts like a parentheses, but a little bit, it's got something else that's true. It makes it positive. So let's do this. What happens when you have two minus signs next to each other? This is minus and negative. Remember, add a line, change a sign? See, it was negative. We make it positive. So now we've turned a minus problem, a subtraction problem, into an addition problem. -2 plus 4 is +2. So I keep it an absolute value. We'll work at that in a second. Plus 2. Keep the absolute value sign right there. 3 minus 5. 3 minus 5 is -2. If you remember, add a line, change a sign. The rules say if they're different signs, you subtract, take the sign of the larger number. So that's -2. If you're unfamiliar with those rules, that's something you're going to have to study on your own. Okay, go to Khan Academy, watch one of the videos on multiplying and subtracting with negative and positive numbers. Let's do this. This is 3. This right here is the absolute value of 2. What's the absolute value of 2? It's just a plain old +2. Remember, it doesn't change. It stays positive. What about this one? There's a 2. It's 2 times the absolute value of -2. The absolute value of -2 is +2. See, it's the same thing. The absolute value of +2 is 2. The absolute value of -2 is 2. Because the absolute value will always be a positive number. That's why we turn that into a positive. This didn't change because it was already positive. This did change because it was negative, and we change it to a positive. Now, what do we do here? We do the multiplication first. So we do this multiplication, and we do this multiplication. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 times 2 is 4. Now it's just plain old simple addition. 6 plus 4 is 10. I circle it, and then I am finished. That's all there is to it. So for your assignment, we're going to do page P10. Remember, it's page P10, not just regular page 10. And we're going to do, there's not that many, we'll do 1 through 12. You need to really practice these. So 12 should be good to practice. Let's do 1 through 12, and it's on page P10. All right. Good luck with those.